Hello everyone, welcome to Sunya IAS and welcome to this lecture. I sincerely hope that you have completed your homework that I gave you, that you read the chapter of Spectrum or whatever source you have of Revolt of 1857. If you have not done it, please go and do it. There is no point moving ahead without covering such a big topic. Moving on. There were a lot of administrative changes after 1857 for very obvious reasons. British Raj was almost overthrown. At least there was a very huge setback from the northern areas, right? The northern belt. So, of course, the British would want to protect their most prized possession, that is India, right? So that's why many administrative changes were there. And all these administrative changes, almost all these administrative changes, were in Government of India Act 1858. This was the first in the series of multiple Government of India Acts. And see the name. Earlier acts, what were they called? They were called Charter Acts. Who issues a charter? Mostly it is a company. You would have heard citizens charter or even a charter of any particular company. Citizens charter to chalo fir bhi theek hai, it is by government, but usually charters are issued by companies to tell their customers what they can expect and to tell their employees also what they can expect, etc. So charter was issued till the time East India Company was there. Of course, when revolt of 1857 has happened, तो ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी की क्रेडिबिलिटी तो डैमेज हो ही गई. व्हाई? बिकॉज सच अ बिग रिवोल्ट हैज हैपेंड. ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी हैज failed in its administrative dimension, right? And if you remember, by the Indian Council Act, by the Indian Council Act, Indian Council Act of it was Indian Council Act or it was Charter Act only, 1853. It was Charter Act. It was Charter Act if I can remember. So just check कर लेना एक बार. Charter है, Indian Council था. इस एक्ट से the monopoly or the trading of the East India Company were not extended by 20 more years. चार्टर एक्ट ही होगा वो, ठीक है? तो not extended by 20 more years. क्या हुआ था? 1793 में it was extended for 20 years. Then the next Charter Act came in 1813, again extended for 20 years. Then the next Charter Act came in 1833, again extended for 20 years. But the next Charter Act, 1853, did not extend it for 20 years. That means British government could any time terminate the services and the rights of the East India Company. It was not that they are getting a right to rule India forever. British government could see that there are issues that are starting to erupt in British India, and that is why no surety in what is the time period. Understood? So effectively, we will study about Government of India Act 1858 also. First, let's start with what were the administrative changes. First question से start करते हैं. Which of the following best explains the purpose behind the Army Amalgamation Scheme of 1861? It moved the British troops in India from the administration of the company to the Crown's direct administration. It sought to remove certain officers in British India Army from India. It sought to increase the use of Indian officers at high post in the army, and it enabled the recruitment of officers from other countries in Europe. So what would be the purpose of this? See, you don't know, most probably none of you would have heard of this particular act because it's not mentioned directly in the books, but you do know that army was the body that actually stabbed the British in the back. है ना? It started from Meerut. It was the army, it was the sepoys, है ना, who actually stabbed British in the back and they started a mutiny. So this army amalgamation scheme would aim at minimizing the role of Indians for sure in the army. Now, of course, British cannot sustain their army without Indians also, right? Because so many Europeans would not come for British service in India. So they have to employ Indians. So on the basis of this limited knowledge, how can we eliminate the options? It moved the British troops in India from administration of the company to the crown's direct administration. This is very much possible because this is company, not company. Company was actually abolished, right? So East India Company did not continue to be an entity anymore. तो ये हो सकता है. This is possibility. But let's read the rest of the options. Sought to remove certain officers in the British Indian Army from India. This is very vague. Certain officers on what basis? This is vague. This is incorrect. Sought to increase the use of Indian officers as higher posts. This is absolute nonsense. Why would they increase the use of Indians when Indians are the one who have betrayed them, so-called betrayed them? And it enabled the recruitment of officers from other countries in Europe. French had their own colonies, Netherlands had their own small colonies. Why would any other European country send their sepoys, send their soldiers to be a part of British India? They were after all competitors only, right? So this is even absolute nonsense. So the answer on the basis of logical guessing, on the basis of very limited knowledge that we have, is easily coming out to be A. है ना? तो कभी भी ऐसा सवाल आए where there is a name of an act and you do not know that act at all, don't leave that question as it is. Read it till the end. There would be some or the other clue. Definitely there would be some or the other clue that would be there. Okay, so A is the correct answer. Next, which of the following best explains the cause of white mutiny in modern Indian history? Reaction against low wages for British troops in India. Resentment of company troops against the amalgamation of all presidency armies. Introduction of Indian troops in the Indian army and reaction against British discrimination against Indian troops. Acha, just before solving this, I'm sorry, I did not explain this because I explained the question solving technique more. देखो, आर्मी अमेलगमेशन स्कीम 1816 से बेसिकली ये हुआ था दैट अर्लियर देयर वर टू आर्मीज. One was the crown army, one was the company army. These armies were now merged because company तो खत्म ही हो गई, and there was a very important need to merge the administration of all these sepoys and the armies and all. So that's why it moved the British troops in India from the administration of company to the crown's direct administration, and there was just one British India army now. Okay, there was no other. There were no two armies anymore. So that was there. Now let's come to the second one. So white mutiny. When this happened, then the British were actually pretty disappointed because as a separate army of East India Company and the separate army of the Crown, they were getting immense benefits and immense racial superiority was there. But when a single army was made, what is the ground rule of army? Army can be posted anywhere. Army men can be posted anywhere. That's the ground rule. You can be asked to function anywhere. तो इस वजह से the white soldiers, है ना, the white soldiers, they resented that how are you keeping us on an equivalent footing on the Indian with the Indian soldiers? You cannot ask us to serve anywhere and everywhere according to your whims and fancies. We are Europeans, we are the British. That was their argument. So here the second one is actually correct. So that was the concern, and that's why B is the answer. Let's move on to the next one. With respect to colonialism in India, what best explains the term white man's burden? We've talked about this. Burden of protecting native rulers in the subsidiary alliance system. Responsibility of ensuring a fair police and judicial system in European colonies. Tax burden borne by European rulers to fund their colonies, and alleged duty of white colonizers to care for non-white indigenous subjects in their colonial possessions. So you already know this. The answer of this white man's burden is D, that apparently Europeans were racially superior and Indians were racially inferior, so they had to take care. They had this benevolent despotism. एक तो अपना white man's burden है, एक और term है benevolent despotism. What is a despot? Despot is someone who's very authoritarian, who does not have any, any democratic character in the way he rules. So the British were not democratic in India. They were democratic in their own country. They were despots in India. But they said that because you all are so uncivilized, because you are all are so, dirty, so we are actually being benevolent. We are actually doing a favor to you by being despots, and we are actually civilizing you. So that was what white man's burden was. First one, you see, burden of protecting native rule. There was no burden in subsidiary alliance. They were being funded by the native rulers only. Responsibility of ensuring a fair police and judicial system. Who did that? Who did that? Who ensured a fair police and judicial system? No one. Then, in fact, we'll study about this Ilbert Bill controversy, wherein Indians and Europeans were put on an equal footing, and how that created a furor across the Europe, across Britain. And tax burden borne by European rulers to fund their colonies. Why would Europe bear even a single penny to fund their colonies? They would not. They were the last people to actually spend any money on that. So, here D is the correct answer. Even by elimination, you can reach there. Chalo, next. Consider the following regarding the Government of India Act 1858. Now is the time. And this act, ironically, was also called the Act for the Good Government of India, Good Governance of India. What an irony, right? Okay, the act abolished the doctrine of lapse introduced by Dalhousie. Indian administration would be looked after by the Secretary of State posted in India. Power to appoint the Governor General and governors remained with the East India Company, and power of the Court of Directors was abolished. So, first, let's see which is the absolutely incorrect statement. What do you think? There was no power left with the East India Company. East India Company did not retain anything, including its existence. So, third is incorrect. Then, now you see, Act did abolish the doctrine of lapse. Doctrine of lapse was all about annexation, right? Annexation. तो वो abolish कर दिया था. Queen Victoria in her proclamation said to the to the princely states who had participated actively, we are not here to annex your territories. We don't want your territories. We'll just rule over you. You rule over your territories. You just rule in my name. I am Kesare Hind. Okay. Correct this. It again I'm saying doctrine of lapse, it is popularly believed was introduced by Dalhousie, but it was not introduced by Dalhousie. It was used to the maximum by Dalhousie. ठीक है, तो ये है. First is correct though. Then second, Indian administration looked after by the Secretary of State posted in India. No, Secretary of State was posted in London. Although यहाँ तक ठीक है कि Secretary of State would look after Indian administration, but Secretary of State who was a member of the British cabinet would be posted in London, because of course he's a member of British cabinet. Just imagine today any cabinet minister of ours, let's say S Jaishankar, है ना, और निर्मला सीतारमन, तो इनको अगर किसी और कंट्री का चार्ज दिया जाए, क्या ये वहीं जाके रूल करेंगे? नहीं, they will rule from their home. So similarly, Secretary of State was posted in London. So second is incorrect. Third is incorrect. Power of Court of Directors was abolished. Absolutely correct. So here only 2 is the correct answer. Next पे आ जाओ. Consider the following statements regarding the Indian Councils Act of 1861. This was first in the series of Councils Act, and Charter Acts are over now. Introduced the concept of deliberative process in the law making in India. Act authorized the cabinet or portfolio system in India. Act vested legislative powers in the governments of Bombay and Madras. And the Act did not introduce any measures to address the demand for Indian self-government. How many of the given statements are correct? So, Indian Councils Act, what is council? Council is a lawmaking body. So, yes, it did actually digress this function, decentralize this function of lawmaking from just the executive council to the legislative body as well. And remember, when was the legislative body made? Charter Act of 1853, right? Legislative body was made, and civil services was opened for open competition as well, remember? So this is correct. Another very important thing is Act authorized the cabinet or portfolio system, which we follow till today. And what is the portfolio system? You understand, right? You studied cabinet in polity also, that various ministries, according to their work, are given to individual ministers, right? So this one is correct. Another thing that this act did was gave ordinance making power to the viceroy, and the designation of governor general was changed to viceroy. ठीक है, तो ordinance making power मिल गया, second correct है. Third, act vested legislative powers in governments of Bombay and Madras. This is actually correct. If you remember, there was an act which was called the Peak of Centralization. Peak of Centralization. क्या act था वो? याद करो, same question has been asked in UPSC 2023 Prelims. It was the Charter Act of 1833. So after reaching the peak of centralization, they started, after such a big revolt, they started giving provincial autonomy slowly, right? So that is when they restored the legislative powers of governments of Bombay and Madras. I hope this is understandable. But Act did not introduce any measures to address the demands for Indian self-government. This is absolutely correct. Now you'll ask, we are not even in the 20th century. Why are we demanding self-government since now? And when did we start demanding it? I mean, you should be having this question. If you have read modern history even once, you should be having this question. So basically what happened was various organizations started emerging. And the definition of self-government was very different back then. Definition of self-government was not azadi. It was that we will remain a part of your empire. We'll take our domestic decisions on our own. So basically, just like states are there today in India, है ना, they can make decisions within their own state, but overall they'll be a part of India only. That was the model that was being demanded, that we'll be a part of British Empire, but let us at least make our domestic decisions, right? So that was the level on which we were subordinated. So here all four are correct, and this is also an important act, Indian Councils Act. Next, consider the following statements regarding Indian Police Act 1861. Act was introduced during tenure of Governor General Canning, and Act aimed to separate the police from the influence of the local people, vest more power in the British government. I don't want you to make questions incorrect because of silly things. यहाँ पे गवर्नर जनरल लिखा है, वाइसरॉय नहीं लिखा है, इस वजह से गलत नहीं करना है इसको. There were two names that were used. Governor General of India continued to be used, and this term Viceroy was added to his. It was an either or kind of a thing. Just like today, let's say the Vice President of India. The Vice President of India is also the chairperson of Rajya Sabha, right? So same thing. गवर्नर जनरल वाइसरॉय सेम थिंग, एब्सोल्युटली सेम थिंग. ठीक है, तो फर्स्ट बिल्कुल सही है. कैनिंग के टाइम पे हुआ था इंडियन पुलिस एक्ट ऑफ 1861, and act aims to separate the police from the influence of local people and vest more power. This is absolutely correct. This is absolutely correct, and this is the definition. This is the main purpose of having this particular act. So here 1 and 2 both are correct. Next, consider the following statements regarding Indian Councils Act of 1892. We are now to the next Councils Act. And you will see Councils Act being more irregular now. So for example, when was the previous Council Act? It was in 1861. Then we have in 1892, right? Then we'll have in 1909. So they're pretty irregular. Then we'll have Government of India Act in 1919. ठीक है. Act increased the number of recommended members in the Legislative Council. Act introduced the principle of communal representation in legislative councils. Act increased the number of non-official members to the legislative councils. And Act gave the power to issue ordinance to the Governor General and provincial governors. How many of the given statements are correct? We are almost entering the 20th century now. So yes, slowly demand for self-government was increasing, and that is when number of recommended members to the legislative council was increasing. Basically, these were not elected members, and the word election was also not used, but electoral principle was used, right? The principle of election. So, for example, the local universities, district boards, etc., they would recommend people to be, nominated to the legislative councils, but those people would be non-official members. They would not have real powers, right? But they would become a part of the process. Then some very superficial powers were also given, like power to discuss the budget, right? So this is how gradually it was there. It started happening. So first is correct. Communal representation happened in Indian Council Act 1909. We have talked about it, जिसे हम separate electorate बोलते हैं. Second is incorrect. Act increased the number of non-official members. Absolutely correct. Because they don't have real powers, na? So they could extend the principle. ठीक है, आप ले लो, non-official member ही तो. And fourth one, this ordinance making power is by 1861 का Council Act, right? Not by 1892. So here, how many statements? Only 2 statements are correct. All right, moving on to the next question. Which of the following objectives were included in Queen Victoria's Proclamation of 1858? Oversee the trade activities of East India Company and ensure that they were conducted with fairness and equity. Guaranteeing the continuation of princely states' sovereignty and appoint a viceroy to govern India on behalf of the British monarch. How many of the given statements are correct? For one, you know it's absolutely incorrect. East India Company did not have any existence. So that is correct. Now, when I say East India Company did not have any existence, that does not mean that the shareholders of East India Company suddenly went away and all. Whatever investments they had made and everything, they sustained, right? But they were not a part of the administration anymore. Okay, they were separate. Anyway, East India Company was an amalgamation of companies, right? So all the companies went their separate way and it was not an East India Company anymore. Then guaranteed the continuation of princely state sovereignty. This happened. Now you might be confused by seeing the word sovereignty. The proclamation actually guaranteed that they would remain sovereign. They just had to rule in the name of the Queen Victoria. That's all. So all the affairs of the government would be conducted by the princely states only, and that's why there were 2 categories of states at our independence. One was the British Indian states and British provinces bolte the jinko hum, which were directly ruled by the British, and one was the princely states. ठीक है, तो ये याद रखना है. Then appoint a viceroy. Yes, viceroy was appointed, who was the same person as the governor general, and a secretary of state was also appointed. So only 2 is the correct answer. Next, which factor helped the British to quell the 1857 uprising in the Rajput state? The lack of support from local Rajput rulers for the revolutionaries, the support of the educated middle class for the British. Soldiers in cantonments were not willing to accept outside leadership of the revolution, and the newspapers failed to accurately convey the aims of the revolution. Which factor actually helped British to quell the 1857 revolt? So basically, I told you that if, let's say, this was that time India, again, I keep on making this map. It was basically all of this was India, right? Only this part, the northern belt, mostly only they were involved. Even the northwestern part, that was Rajputs, were not involved. Now, why were they not involved? Because the local Rajput rulers did not really support the revolutionaries. And why was that? I told you there was a lot of infighting among the Rajput rulers, right? So, in a way, they were surrounded by enemies. Rajput rulers were surrounded by enemies. ठीक है, तो इस कारण से जो है they were not really willing to support the revolutionaries, because then their own existence would be hampered. Now it is said, if the Rajput rulers would have supported the British, supported the revolutionaries, Indian revolutionaries, then revolt of 1857 could have been a success because they were very powerful, right? They had a lot of army, they had a lot of armed forces, there were a lot of arms and ammunitions as well. And Rajputs are known for their fighting skills, right? But unfortunately, they did not become a part of it. Also because the overall authority was Bahadur Shah Zafar, right? And he was, of course, Mughals and Rajputs did not gel along very well historically. So that was also the reason. So first is the correct answer. Now, next one. Queen Victoria's proclamation of 1858 declared that which one of the following policies would immediately supersede the policy of annexation? Policy of subordinate isolation, subordinate union, federation, or ring fence. So here, by your limited knowledge, whatever, and limited knowledge I mean, always be ready to not know everything in the prelims examination. है ना? When you don't know things and still you can solve the question, that is when you will clear the examination, right? So here the policy was policy of subordinate union, that in your own domain you are sovereign, but overall you are subordinate to the British crown and the queen. So you are supposed to rule in the name of the queen only. You are not sovereign as such. You are subordinate and you are part of the union only. ठीक है जी. So that was there. All right. So these were the broad changes that were brought in after the revolt of 1857. Now, modern Indian history is divided pre-1857 and post-1857. We have completed pre-1857. There are some aspects that have to be completed and we'll complete them in different kind of classes. Just the way it has been covered in spectrum, how has it been covered? That let's say we're talking about commissions, we're talking about socio-religious reform movement. So they have their own separate chapters. And police reforms, education reforms. That would be the way that we will cover it instead of covering it with the time period. Okay, we'll cover it issue wise. So I would suggest revise the 1857 wala chapter and the administrative changes brought after 1857. Then we will enter an entirely new domain, that is nationalist movement after 1857. So that's all for this lecture, short lecture tha ye. I hope you derived some value out of it. That is how we are planning to cover our entire syllabus through 3000 plus MCQs. 400 we have done for Indian polity, 400 for economy, more than 150 for modern history. So, you know, we are almost there with 1000 MCQs we have already covered. So, geography we'll be doing after this, art and culture, ancient medieval, environment, ecology, science and tech, and current affairs. Everything through MCQs. So, if you purchase the course, if you subscribe to the course, the benefit that you'll get is that you'll be able to solve these questions on your own in advance and then see the solved MCQs and their detailed explanation. And then if you need, you come to the lectures. So that will require less time for you. And yes, you can contact on this number, visit this website to know more about this particular course. And I'll see you all in the next lecture. Keep preparing and be consistent. Consistency pays off the most in this examination. Okay. I'll see you all in the next lecture. Bye-bye.